She was a quiet girl who mostly kept to herself. At school, she often found herself at the edge of conversations, smiling politely when someone spoke to her, but rarely joining in. People noticed her calm nature, and while some thought she was shy, others simply didn't pay much attention. She didn't mind. She had her own world, filled with music, and that was enough for her. From the moment she could remember, she loved listening to piano music. The way each note could tell a story fascinated her, and she spent hours at home trying to imitate the melodies she heard. Her family knew she loved music, but they didn't push her, letting her explore it at her own pace. School was a different story. It wasn't that she disliked learning, but the classroom could feel like a place where she was invisible. She often worried that if she spoke up, she might say the wrong thing. The teacher of her music class had a reputation. He was strict, and students often felt nervous around him. He had high expectations and wasn't afraid to point out mistakes in front of everyone. The teacher expected perfection, and he liked to challenge students, sometimes a little too harshly. Most students tried their best to meet those standards, but some struggled under his pressure. She knew that she would always be careful, hoping to stay under the radar and avoid drawing attention to herself. On this particular morning, the school corridors buzzed with the usual chatter and laughter. She walked slowly, clutching her books to her chest, feeling the familiar weight of anticipation as she approached the music room. She had been practicing a new piece for weeks, and it was something she was proud of. But there was also a quiet fear inside her. She had seen how the teacher could react if someone didn't perform perfectly, and she didn't want to be the target of criticism. She wished she could disappear, blend into the background, and just let the day pass. When she entered the classroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. The teacher was standing at the front, arms crossed, scanning the students with a sharp look. There was a hint of a smirk, like he was already planning something. Some students fidgeted in their seats, sensing that the class might be more intense than normal. She found her seat at the corner and tried to settle in, flipping open her notebook as if to focus on her practice. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The teacher began the lesson, talking about scales and proper hand techniques. He moved around the room, checking on students' practice progress. She tried to focus, carefully listening to his instructions, making sure she followed each movement and note. She was determined to do her best, hoping that if she stayed attentive and quiet, she could avoid any confrontation. Yet, as she watched him interact with other students, she noticed a pattern. He seemed to single out those who were quieter or less confident, almost as if he enjoyed testing them in front of the class. A cold shiver went down her spine. She realized that being good at music might not be enough to avoid his scrutiny. Minutes passed, and he finally turned toward her. She felt her heart skip a beat. The teacher had a way of looking at a student that made them feel like every mistake was magnified. "You," he said, pointing at her with a finger that seemed heavier than normal. "Come here and play for the class." Her stomach twisted. She hadn't expected this. She had been careful, keeping her abilities private, practicing in silence. Now all eyes were on her, and she felt a wave of panic. The classroom, once a place of learning, suddenly felt like a stage where she was meant to fail. She looked down, trying to steady herself, but she could hear whispers around the room, some curious, some skeptical. The teacher's tone was firm, leaving no room for refusal. She knew that saying no wasn't an option. Slowly, she rose from her seat, each step toward the piano feeling heavier than the last. She could feel her hands trembling slightly, not because she doubted her skill, but because of the pressure of being watched. She tried to breathe deeply, recalling the hours she had spent practicing at home, the quiet moments when she lost herself in music. That had always given her comfort. She clung to that memory now, like a lifeline in a sea of anxiety. When she reached the piano, she paused, resting her fingers lightly on the keys. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of a clock ticking somewhere in the background. Her classmates leaned forward, watching intently. She could feel their anticipation, some expecting her to stumble, others simply curious. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to push aside the fear, to remind herself that the music belonged to her, not to the teacher's expectations. The teacher leaned back, arms crossed, watching with a faint smirk that made her tighten her grip on the piano bench. She could sense his skepticism, his belief that this quiet student might falter. A small part of her wanted to shrink back, to run away, but another part, stronger and more insistent, told her to play. She had prepared for this, not for anyone else, but for herself. It was a test, yes, but one she could meet with courage if she allowed herself to believe in her own ability. As she sat, her fingers hovering over the keys, she took a deep breath and began. The first notes were soft, cautious, almost hesitant. But as she continued, the music began to flow more naturally. Her confidence grew with each measure, each chord, each melody. She forgot about the teacher, forgot about the class, and became immersed in the music. It was as if she and the piano were communicating in a language that only they understood. The sound filled the room, clear and resonant, capturing the attention of everyone present. Students who had been skeptical now leaned in, drawn to the beauty and precision of her playing. They exchanged glances, quietly acknowledging that this was not what they had expected. Even those who were usually talkative fell silent, mesmerized by the music. The teacher's smirk began to fade, replaced by a flicker of surprise. He watched as the quiet student, whom he had tried to intimidate, played with skill and emotion far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Her heart still raced, but it was no longer from fear. There was exhilaration in the act of sharing her talent, in proving to herself that her hard work mattered. The notes, once uncertain, now rang with clarity and confidence. Each chord carried a piece of her story, a reflection of her dedication and love for music. She felt herself becoming stronger with each passing second, her small, quiet presence commanding the room through sound alone. When the last note faded, there was a pause. The room remained silent for a heartbeat, then erupted in quiet murmurs of admiration. Some students whispered to one another, clearly impressed. The teacher, who had intended to embarrass her, now looked on with a mix of astonishment and respect. He hadn't expected this outcome, and for a moment, his authority seemed less intimidating. She sat there, fingers still resting lightly on the keys, a small smile on her lips, feeling a quiet triumph. This moment marked a turning point. She realized that being quiet or shy did not make her invisible. Her passion and talent spoke louder than any words, louder than any attempt to humiliate her. She had faced fear and uncertainty, and through her own skill and determination, she had turned the situation around. The experience stayed with her, a reminder that confidence could be found in unexpected moments, and that true ability could shine even under pressure. She returned to her seat after the applause had subsided, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. She no longer felt small or overlooked. The teacher, though still imposing, seemed to regard her with a newfound awareness. And while the classroom continued with its lessons, she carried a quiet sense of empowerment, knowing that she had faced a challenge head-on and had emerged stronger. The day had begun like any other, but by the time she left the classroom, she had discovered a deeper truth about herself, that courage and talent could not be suppressed, and that even in the most intimidating situations, she had the power to shine. The next day, she arrived at school feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The memory of the previous class was still fresh in her mind, and a quiet pride lingered alongside a new apprehension. She had proven herself, but she knew that not everyone would react the same way again. The teacher, with his strict and sometimes unpredictable ways, could turn any moment into a challenge. She had learned that day that talent alone didn't always shield a student from scrutiny. As she walked through the hallways, she tried to focus on other things: the smell of the cafeteria, the chatter of students in groups, the sound of lockers closing. But a small part of her mind kept returning to the music room, to the piano, and to the way the teacher had looked at her during her performance. It was strange to feel both nervous and ready at the same time. She carried her music book in her hands, flipping through the pages absently, running her fingers over the sheet music. The notes seemed comforting, a reminder that no matter what happened in class, she had something she could control. When she entered the classroom, the atmosphere was slightly different from the day before. There was a quiet energy, a subtle anticipation among the students. Some of them shot her small glances, curious to see how she would handle the next challenge. She gave polite nods in return, trying to appear calm. The teacher stood at the front, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. There was a glint in his expression, a look that suggested he had noticed her performance and was perhaps plotting a new test. "Good morning," he began, his voice carrying authority. "Yesterday we saw a demonstration of skill and emotion. Today we will take it further. I expect everyone to participate fully, but there will be no excuses for hesitation or uncertainty." He let the words linger, scanning the students to see their reactions. She felt her pulse quicken. It was clear that he intended to challenge the class again, and somehow she had a feeling she would be involved. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had faced pressure before and had succeeded. Perhaps she could do it again. As the class began, the teacher moved around, listening to each student's scales and exercises. When he reached her, he paused, watching her carefully. "I want you to perform a new piece today," he said, his tone sharp but not unkind. "Not just any piece, something that shows range and expression. You may play it alone or choose another student to accompany you. This is your opportunity to demonstrate more than technical skill. Show us the feeling behind the music." Her stomach tightened. This was unexpected. She had been practicing quietly, but nothing quite prepared her for a challenge framed in such a high-pressure way. She felt the eyes of the class on her, curious to see how she would respond. She thought for a moment, then nodded, trying to appear composed even as her heart raced. She would play alone, trusting her own ability. It was a choice she had to make for herself. She walked to the piano with careful steps, feeling the familiar weight of nervous anticipation. Her classmates murmured softly, exchanging glances, sensing the tension in the room. Some whispered about how well she had played the day before, and others speculated about whether she would rise to this new challenge. She ignored the chatter, focusing on the keys, the music sheet, and the memories of hours spent practicing at home, alone in a room filled with sunlight and quiet determination. As she sat at the piano, the teacher's eyes followed her closely. He seemed curious to see how she would respond under this new type of pressure. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat and the connection to the music. She thought of every practice session, every note she had learned by ear, every melody she had carefully mastered. The music was hers, and it had always been her safe place. The first notes began softly, cautious and tentative. She felt the familiar surge of nerves, but it slowly transformed into concentration. She allowed herself to feel the music, to let it guide her fingers across the keys. With each measure, her confidence grew. The notes filled the room, resonating with a warmth and clarity that captivated her classmates. Some of them leaned forward, drawn to the beauty of her performance. They could see the dedication in her movements, the emotion in the melody. The teacher watched in silence, a subtle shift in his expression as he realized that the quiet student was handling the challenge with grace and skill. She played with a balance of technical precision and heartfelt emotion, allowing the music to convey more than words ever could. The room, once filled with tension, now seemed to bend around her performance, focused solely on the sound that emerged from her hands. As the piece progressed, she began to experiment with dynamics, emphasizing certain notes and softening others, letting the music tell a story that was uniquely hers. Her classmates were drawn into the performance, sensing the authenticity and depth of her expression. They whispered to one another, surprised by the transformation of a student who had once seemed so quiet and unassuming. The music filled the space in a way that demanded attention without forcing it, capturing the essence of her talent. The teacher leaned forward slightly, observing every nuance of her playing. He had hoped to test her limits, perhaps expecting hesitation or mistakes, but instead he found focus, creativity, and poise. She played on, encouraged by the subtle energy in the room, the quiet support of her peers, and the realization that she was capable of meeting challenges on her own terms. When the final chord sounded, there was a moment of silence. The room seemed suspended in time, absorbing the echoes of her performance. Then, slowly, the students began to applaud, softly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Some clapped their hands together, while others simply nodded in admiration. She felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her, mixed with relief. She had faced the challenge and had done more than just meet expectations. She had exceeded them. The teacher, still standing at the front, finally spoke. His voice was measured, a hint of surprise tempered with approval. "Well done," he said simply. "That was a performance that showed both skill and heart. Remember, music is not only about notes. It is about expressing yourself. Today, you reminded us of that." His words carried weight, an acknowledgement that her quiet determination and talent had made an impact. She returned to her seat, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. The applause of her classmates still echoed in her ears, a reminder that recognition could come in many forms. She realized that challenges, even those that seemed intimidating at first, could become opportunities to grow, to show strength, and to gain respect. The memory of facing the teacher's scrutiny and overcoming it was now etched into her mind, a source of confidence she could draw upon in the future. As the class continued, she found herself more attentive, not from fear but from a new sense of purpose. She had discovered that she could handle pressure, that her talent was valid, and that she could make her presence felt without raising her voice or seeking attention. The day ended, and as she left the classroom, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The teacher's challenge had tested her in ways she had not expected, but she had emerged stronger, more confident, and ready for whatever came next. Walking through the school corridors, she reflected on the experience. She realized that facing difficulties didn't always require confrontation or argument. Sometimes, simply doing what you know you can do, with honesty and dedication, was enough to prove your worth. Her music had spoken for her, and in that expression, she had found both courage and recognition. It was a lesson she would carry with her, a reminder that true skill and determination could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The day felt heavier than usual as she entered the music classroom. The usual chatter of students seemed subdued, replaced by a tense silence that made her stomach tighten. She had a sense that today would be different. The teacher's eyes scanned the room with their usual sharpness, and she could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her. She took a deep breath, holding her music book close, trying to focus on the melodies and scales she had practiced so many times at home. The teacher began the lesson, reviewing the basics of technique and theory. Most of the students tried to answer questions quickly, hoping to avoid being singled out. She kept her hands folded on her desk, listening attentively, waiting for the moment that would inevitably come. The teacher paused, his gaze falling on her. It was that familiar look, the one that made her feel both exposed and challenged. "You," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "Play something for the class. Something that truly represents your skill and understanding. No hesitation, no mistakes." The words hit her like a sudden gust of wind. Her heart raced, her palms grew slightly sweaty. She had practiced countless times, but performing on demand, in front of everyone, with the teacher's expectations hanging over her, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. She stood slowly, trying to appear composed. The students' eyes followed her as she walked toward the piano. She felt their curiosity and doubt, their anticipation and silent judgment. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she pushed forward, reminding herself of all the hours she had spent practicing, the quiet mornings and late evenings when she had poured herself into the music. This was her moment, and she had to trust herself. As she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, letting her fingers hover above the keys. The classroom was silent, every eye fixed on her. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, and tried to remember why she loved music in the first place. It wasn't for applause or recognition, or to prove herself to the teacher. It was for the way the notes could tell a story, for the feeling that music could express what words could not. That thought steadied her, and she began to play. The first notes were cautious, soft, almost tentative. But as her fingers moved over the keys, she began to feel the music in a deeper way. She allowed herself to become immersed in the melody, letting the rhythm guide her hands. Each note carried her focus, each chord built her confidence. The teacher watched closely, his arms crossed, a faint frown on his face as if he were trying to predict what would happen next. The other students leaned forward, drawn in by the unexpected intensity of her playing. With every measure, she grew more confident. She experimented with dynamics, letting certain notes rise and others fall, creating a story that was uniquely hers. She could feel the emotion in each chord, the connection between her and the piano becoming stronger. The classroom, once tense and expectant, seemed to melt away as the music filled the space. Her classmates were captivated, some whispering to one another, some simply sitting in awe, unable to look away. She realized that she was no longer playing for the teacher's approval or for the classroom's recognition. She was playing for herself, for the music, for the quiet satisfaction of sharing something deeply personal. The initial fear and nervousness transformed into a focused determination. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, each note carrying the emotion she felt inside. The teacher's expression began to change. The stern look of doubt shifted to surprise, then to curiosity. He had expected hesitation, mistakes, perhaps even embarrassment. Instead, he was witnessing a performance that demonstrated skill, control, and a depth of feeling he hadn't anticipated. The quiet student, the one he had thought would falter under pressure, was commanding the room through the power of music alone. As the piece progressed, she allowed herself to explore subtle variations, emphasizing the highs and lows, the tension and release inherent in the composition. Her classmates were drawn in completely, some leaning in to catch every note, others closing their eyes to savor the sound. There was a shared sense of awe, a recognition that something remarkable was happening. Even the teacher, who had tried to intimidate and challenge her, could not hide his admiration. He observed every movement, every decision she made, realizing that the quiet girl in front of him had more than talent. She had courage, presence, and the ability to communicate emotions through her art. For a moment, the classroom was suspended in a kind of reverent silence, with nothing but the sound of the piano filling the air. She felt a surge of exhilaration. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the culmination of countless hours of practice and quiet dedication. The fear that had gripped her at the start of the lesson had melted away, replaced by a confident flow of expression. The music was no longer just a series of notes. It was a reflection of her journey, her perseverance, and her unwavering love for the piano. When the final chord resonated, there was a brief pause. The room was silent, everyone absorbing the last echoes of the music. Then, slowly, the students began to clap, softly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Whispers of admiration spread across the classroom, and even those who had doubted her talent nodded in quiet acknowledgement. She sat there, fingers resting lightly on the keys, a small smile forming on her lips, feeling a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. The teacher finally spoke, his voice calm but filled with a new respect. That was a performance that demonstrated both skill and understanding. Well done. Remember, music is not just about playing notes. It is about conveying emotion and connecting with your audience. Today, you have reminded us all of that truth. She returned to her seat, her hands still trembling slightly from the intensity of the experience, but her heart was steady with a newfound confidence. She had faced the teacher's challenge, confronted the pressure, and emerged not only successful but empowered. She realized that fear could be transformed into focus, that challenges could be met with courage, and that her quiet determination was a source of strength. As the lesson continued, she felt a subtle shift in the classroom atmosphere. Her classmates regarded her differently now, with a mix of curiosity, admiration, and respect. The teacher, too, seemed to be reconsidering his approach, recognizing that sometimes the quietest students possessed the most remarkable abilities. She listened attentively, but her mind often drifted back to the piano, to the feeling of letting the music guide her and to the realization that she could rise to any challenge if she trusted herself. When the final bell rang, She packed her things slowly, savoring the sense of accomplishment. She walked through the school corridors with a quiet confidence, knowing that the experience had changed her in a subtle but important way. The day had begun like any other, but through courage, dedication, and a love for music, she had discovered a strength she hadn't fully known existed. She realized that this moment would stay with her, a reminder that true ability and perseverance could shine even in the face of fear and scrutiny. The teacher's attempt to challenge her had inadvertently given her an opportunity to show who she truly was, not just as a student, but as someone capable of handling pressure, expressing herself, and leaving a lasting impression. The lesson extended far beyond music. It was about courage, resilience, and the quiet power of believing in oneself. The classroom was still as she sat down at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but it was different this time. She felt a strange mix of anticipation and excitement. The teacher, who had tried to intimidate her in the past, now seemed intrigued, leaning slightly forward, watching every subtle movement. Her classmates, too, watched intently, sensing that something remarkable was about to happen. She took a deep breath, letting the familiar rhythm of her heartbeat guide her focus. She thought of all the hours spent practicing, the quiet afternoons at home when the world outside faded away, leaving only her and the music. This was the culmination of her dedication and passion. The first note she played broke the silence like a delicate ripple across still water. It was soft, tentative, but carried a sense of honesty that immediately drew everyone's attention. As she continued, her confidence grew. Each note was deliberate, precise, and expressive. She felt a connection to the piano that went beyond mere technique. The music flowed naturally, filling the room with emotion. Her classmates, who had often overlooked her quiet nature, now found themselves captivated. Whispers of admiration passed quietly among them, a recognition that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. The teacher's expression shifted as he watched her play. He had expected hesitation, perhaps even failure, but what he saw was the opposite. The quiet girl in front of him commanded the room with skill and emotion. Every movement of her hands was intentional. Every chord carried depth and feeling. The music told a story that words could not convey, a story of dedication, resilience, and quiet strength. With each passing measure, she allowed herself to explore variations in tempo and dynamics, emphasizing certain notes and softening others. The room seemed to hold its breath, responding to the ebb and flow of the music. Her classmates were silent, leaning in, drawn by the beauty and power of her performance. Some closed their eyes to fully absorb the sound, while others simply watched, amazed at her ability to transform a classroom into a space filled with emotion. The teacher, who had tried to challenge her, could not hide his astonishment. He had underestimated her, assuming that her quiet demeanor reflected a lack of confidence or talent. Now, he realized that her strength lay not in showiness, but in her ability to focus, express, and move others through her music. For a moment, he watched without speaking, allowing the performance to unfold fully before him. As the piece progressed, she found herself completely immersed. The fear that had once gripped her was gone, replaced by a powerful sense of presence. She played with precision, yet each note was infused with emotion, telling a story that captivated the room. Her classmates were spellbound, experiencing the music as a shared moment of beauty and wonder. She noticed small details, the subtle nods of admiration from some, the widened eyes of those who had doubted her, the quiet smiles that acknowledged her talent. These gestures, though silent, spoke volumes. The music had created a bridge between her inner world and the outside, allowing her to communicate in a way that words never could. The teacher finally spoke, but not as he had before. His voice was calm, measured, and tinged with respect. Your performance shows more than skill. It shows heart, dedication, and an understanding of the music that goes beyond technique. Remember this lesson. Talent is amplified by courage and expression. Today, you have shown all of us the power of music and the strength within you. Her heart swelled with pride, but she remained focused on the piano. She allowed the final section of the piece to unfold, letting the music rise and fall naturally. Each chord resonated with clarity, filling every corner of the room. The students listened in awe, some whispering softly to one another, others sitting in silent admiration. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What had begun as a tense classroom now felt like a space of shared wonder and respect. When the final note faded, there was a pause. The room seemed to hold its breath, absorbing the echoes of her performance. Then, slowly, applause began. At first, it was tentative, but it grew steadily, filling the room with appreciation. Her classmates clapped, some standing, others simply nodding, acknowledging the remarkable talent they had witnessed. The teacher, who had intended to challenge and perhaps embarrass her, now regarded her with genuine respect. She returned to her seat, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and exhilaration. Her hands still tingled from the intensity of the performance, but her heart was steady. She had faced the challenge head-on, and the outcome was more than she could have imagined. The quiet girl who had once felt overlooked had become the center of admiration, not through boastfulness, but through skill, courage, and authenticity. As the lesson continued, she felt a newfound sense of confidence. Her classmates treated her differently now, with a mix of curiosity and respect. Even the teacher seemed to view her in a new light, recognizing her quiet strength and dedication. She listened to the rest of the lesson, absorbing the material but also reflecting on what had just happened. She realized that challenges could be opportunities, that pressure could bring out the best in her, and that her talent, when combined with courage, could leave a lasting impression. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, she packed her things slowly, savoring the feeling of accomplishment. The day had started like any other, but she had experienced something transformative. She walked through the school corridors with a quiet confidence, knowing that she had faced fear, embraced her abilities, and emerged stronger. The music had spoken for her, revealing a depth of talent and resilience that could not be ignored. She understood now that recognition was not the goal, but a byproduct of dedication and authenticity. Her performance had not only impressed her classmates and teacher, but had also solidified her own belief in her abilities. She had discovered that true confidence came from within, from trusting her skills and staying true to herself, even under pressure. As she left the classroom, she carried with her a sense of empowerment. The experience had shown her that challenges, no matter how daunting, could be met with courage and grace. She had turned a moment meant to intimidate into an opportunity to shine, proving not only to others but also to herself that she was capable of more than she had realized. The day ended with a quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you have faced your fears and emerged victorious, stronger and more confident than before. The days that followed her performance were different. She noticed small changes everywhere, in the way her classmates looked at her, in the subtle respect that the teacher now showed, and in the confidence that had quietly grown within her. She no longer felt like the quiet girl who hid in the corner. She felt seen, not because she had sought attention, but because she had shown who she really was through her music. The memory of her performance played over and over in her mind. Each time she thought of it, she felt the courage that had carried her through the challenge, the clarity of expression, and the awe in her classmates' eyes. It was a reminder that facing fear head-on could reveal strengths she hadn't known she possessed. She realized that the lesson went beyond music. It was about resilience, self-belief, and the quiet power of persistence. Back in the classroom, the teacher began to treat her differently, though subtly. He no longer singled her out to challenge her in a harsh way. Instead, he seemed to recognize her dedication and skill, guiding her in ways that were encouraging rather than intimidating. Sometimes he would pause to ask her opinion, or to listen carefully to her ideas during discussions about technique or interpretation. She noticed that even when he gave assignments, he seemed to have a newfound respect for the way she approached challenges. It was a delicate shift, but significant, and it made her feel a sense of validation that went deeper than words.